I think with artificial intelligence among society anyway, we just don't know what it is. And that when you don't know about something, you tend to be fearful. So what would be helpful is to have some meaningful, I guess I'll call them scientific discussions. What is AI? And you're right, Chat GPT, everybody tries that. And
Right.
you can develop some pretty interesting writing and the like. But when students in university or school start using artificial intelligence to generate academic papers with seemingly false pretense, and then things get based on those, we have this invirtuous cycle of creating fake information.
Hello and welcome again to another episode of Sacktown Talks. I am your host, Jarrett Blondin. Today, we're glad to be joined again by Lance Hastings from the California Manufacturing Technology Association. Lance, thanks for joining us again. How's it going?
Great. Thanks, Jared. Happy New Year.
I know. Happy New Year. It seems like we have you all right in the beginning of the year every year, kind of talk about what's going on with the Manufacturing Association.
Yeah, it's good. Good time. Legislature's back in session now. Been back for
Is that a
week.
good time?
Well, it's an interesting time.
Right.
We'll go with that. But I think the big challenge for all of us in the business is the pending state budget deficit of probably $60 billion or more, depending on how things come in. And then it's going to make spending a big challenge for a lot of us. And they're going to be looking for additional revenue. And they often come to look in the business community. So we're going to be playing a lot of defense this year, I think.
It's interesting. We were talking to, Mike Gibson recently and a couple other folks have come on, talked about the budget. We've had some interesting, budget surpluses, and the budget has grown exponentially these past, 5 years. And, something I just never really pondered before is that you might have gotten something in the budget years prior, but it never got paid out or just kind of sitting there because it takes a while for things to percolate and that money gets clawed back. So yeah, it should be interesting for a lot of these folks who, might have gotten something in the past or tax credit or something like that, and that might be going away.
Yeah, it was going to be challenging. It's almost like Congress, where you can authorize things and appropriate. Sometimes they're not linked up, so you get an authorization, but there's no money for it, and
Right.
we may see a lot of that.
Yeah.
This coming year.
Yeah, so it's interesting. We just had Mike Gibson on. He was took over the Arts and Entertainment Committee. He was talking about the ports and kind of the entertainment industry, and kind of there's some similar stuff, right? Where other states are competing with the movie industry, others areas are competing with our ports, and we have to remain competitive, kind of like manufacturing, right? There's other manufacturers around the state. They're always trying to steal our high-paying jobs. Kind of what's the status of manufacturing in California, and how are we keeping our grip on our manufacturing jobs here?
Well, as the governor said in that debate with Ron DeSantis, that California is dominating in manufacturing, and he's not wrong. We are the largest manufacturing state. We have over 30,000 separate manufacturing entities, 1.3 million employees in the sector, and then the output is about $300 billion every year. So we are the biggest. My job is to keep us there because, as you said, there are other states that are trying to not only attract businesses generally, but manufacturers specifically with incentives to come elsewhere. And I always have in mind, given our geographic location right here on the Pacific Coast, California is a global competitor. So that's really important to us, but also we're a national competitor. And we need to have a reasonable cost structure. We need affordable, reliable energy. All those things that are inputs to the sector are something that we fight for all the time, not just manufacturing, and making the manufacturing environment conducive.
Yeah. So what are the elements that go into manufacturing, right? It's employment, right? You got to have, I guess the minimum wage is a big deal, right?
Well, less for us because the average wage in manufacturing is $85,000 a year.
Holy cow.
So we're beyond the minimum wage
Right.
because the nice part about manufacturing is employees are bringing a skill to the table. And whether it's a trade skill or something they've developed, but the manufacturing employee is one of the more advanced in terms of skills employee of any sector around.
Okay. And so I guess one thing a lot of companies look at is cost of living for the employees, right? Is that an issue?
It is, particularly when with the value chain, the supply chain, housing costs, transportation costs, including fuel. It makes it more expensive to work here in California. I think not only our cost structure, but our pay structure reflects that, but it's still a challenge when, even a neighboring state like Nevada or even Arizona has a much different cost structure. It's hard to compete with that.
Right.
But we're doing our best.
Yeah. I can remember during COVID or 2019, there was a lot of companies like Disney, for example, announced they're moving some stuff to Florida, and then that just kind of blew up, and now they're coming back, staying here. Are you seeing that? More people are coming back to California?
I haven't seen that yet. And what we have seen in the manufacturing sector, sometimes either the executive office or the corporate offices might relocate. But the manufacturing facilities are still here. And I know there's a lot of talk about Elon Musk leaving California, going to Austin. He just took his, the company structure to Texas, but Fremont is the largest single manufacturing location in California. 20,000 employees plus every day go to work in Fremont,
Wow.
and you just don't pick up an auto manufacturing plant and move it somewhere else.
Yeah.
So
And I remember like getting like an Apple product and it would say like designed in California. Never really made in California, but they had the
yeah,
plant, I guess in Elk Grove. They have a couple of things here where they maybe reassemble and do some stuff. But yeah, Tesla, like something that was designed here, built here, and still to this day, like you get a
yeah,
Tesla, it was like, built an hour away. So
that's
that's
right.
really cool. So, another thing, so we're talking about what goes into manufacturing, employees, cost basis. What else are the elements to like, make this the perfect kind of manufacturing area?
Well, a lot of it goes back in history. So
Mhm.
after World War II, when the service members were coming back to the country, I mean, California really put its kind of stake in the ground in the manufacturing sector. So the aerospace industry down south has been built up. We have a strong textile presence down in Southern California as well. Then up and down the Central Valley and the coast, the innovation of Apple, Google, Oracle. California is like the hotbed of innovation.
Mhm.
So we have the natural ingredients for manufacturing and almost any other economic sector around, but is holding on to that, which has proven to be the challenge. We have, great intellectual property in the state, and I think there's a California spirit that drives a lot of it because we're just lucky enough to live in this great state. But the challenges are, as I mentioned, energy costs, big input.
Mhm.
So between energy and labor, those are the two biggest cost inputs to the manufacturing sector. And then, depending upon what you make, I mean, making a car is a very expensive
Right.
endeavor, and making belts or ball bearings or something else a little bit smaller of an enterprise. But it's the cost of energy and workforce that are really the main cost differentials from California to other states.
Right. And I guess it's something that kind of surprised me sometimes is a lot of people automatically assume California has the most expensive energy because we have these green initiatives and stuff like that. And I guess it's highly variable kind of comparing where you live in California. Cause like, I don't know, here in Sacramento, we have SMUD and it's
Yeah.
not that expensive, but if you live in PG&E, it could be like 3 times as much. Kind of what is the kind of the status of energy costs in California for
Yeah.
manufacturing?
It's at least a third more, and it depends on the input. So for manufacturing, we need natural gas,
Mhm.
particularly making steel. Hard to make steel with electricity. And those are some of the components that we're adding to the debate about electrification in California. The manufacturing sector would be disadvantaged if we woke up tomorrow and everything was electricity based, you wouldn't have as vibrant a manufacturing sector as we have now. So our job is to work with the governor and the legislature on that transition. And we need a different kind of technology to help, particularly with heat. And the old saying is heat is energy, and we need a lot of heat in the manufacturing sector. So that's one of the big issues that I'm pushing forward. Hey,
Mhm.
wait, let's make a reasonable transition time frame and cost to get to whatever that next iteration of the manufacturing sector will look like, but we just can't do it right now.
Yeah. I think what's interesting is when you learn about a lot of these companies, these big manufacturing, they actually have like on-site their own energy production, right?
Some of that's for reliability because I worked for a brewer about 20 years ago,
Mhm.
and they lost 40,000 gallons of beer because of a brownout that was unanticipated in Southern
Right.
California. And that's a lot of beer to lose. And I'm sure there are a lot of tears shed over loss of beer at that amount. But just that the surety of your processes and your practice, you just can't shut down a manufacturing
Mhm.
facility. In some cases, it may take 3 or 4 days to effectively shut down a manufacturer. So when you have a brownout like that, there's an immediate shock to the system. It can be very disastrous.
Oh, wow. That's something you don't think about. So 2023, we checked in with you in the beginning. Kind of how did it end up? How did you guys do in 2023 in the legislature?
I think all in 2023 was a good year for manufacturing because coming out of COVID, uh, everyone was hitting their stride again, identifying some gaps in workforce. Workforce is still the biggest challenge. I should have identified the priorities.
Mhm.
Yes, energy is a big component, but it's that workforce, and particularly the future workforce in manufacturing that's critical. So 2023, I think, was a stabilizing kind of year. But now, as the the budget is coming forward, we're kind of getting a gut punch. The things started to look good, and then all of a sudden, not so much.
Right.
So I think the bridge between 2023 and 2024 is going to be really what can the state of California do to help manufacturing along. And we have a wonderful idea that's an investment credit that would encourage manufacturers to actually invest in California. And that is to get some relief on buying capital equipment. Some equipment needs to be refreshed
Mhm.
because keep in mind when COVID hit, all the economic activity about investing in your plant and your equipment, it was put on hold. And even coming out of COVID, there's some reluctance, particularly with the small and
Well, with the
medium.
inflation, right?
Yeah.
Now things are
Well, and
twice as expensive. Right?
and the interest rates.
Yeah.
I mean, so to buy a piece of equipment is much more expensive. But what we'd like to do is partner with the state and have them be a helpful catalyst for manufacturers to invest in California. And we have a legislation, again, Assembly Member Grayson is carrying for us, AB 52. It's pending in the Senate still. Hopefully we're going to move it the next couple of weeks. But you simply provide an investment credit for manufacturers, small, medium, and large.
And I guess that's an interesting thing is like, yes, it's a credit, right? So it takes something out of the budget, but isn't there like a multiplier effect on this where, yeah, it might cost some money, but it actually makes the state more money in the long run?
Yeah, it's different from a legislative proposal we had before that was an exemption. So you wouldn't pay the sales tax at the beginning. This bill requires you still to pay the sales tax at time of purchase, and then you claim it back on your tax returns at the end of the year. We like that approach because you have to make that investment first.
Right.
And then we can demonstrate to the state, hey, look, manufacturers are back in business. They're buying all this equipment. And in many cases, the equipment is going to be more efficient and less energy intensive than what it's replacing. So it's a win-win really for the state. And then there's the knock-on growth rate, as you talked about, the multiplier effect. We have a study that shows about 120,000 jobs could be created with manufacturers investing like that. And that's about a 10% growth rate,
right?
Which is huge. And with the great wages that we pay, it's just a winner for the state of California.
It's kind of interesting, like, talking to these people and you're learning kind of these different sectors of California that you didn't really think about, how like boats come in from overseas, drop stuff off here. We assemble them or reassemble them or shipping them out and in, and you have all this truck traffic. And a lot of people have been saying like, we need to clean up the ports with these clean energy, new future vehicles. Kind of what are you guys seeing in this space of the hydrogen vehicle, the electric truck, the propane truck? Kind of what are manufacturers kind of generating to, and kind of the costs, and like how are they going to pay for the switch to these new vehicles?
I think we're at a real curious time, not only the state's history, but as we approach the environment and what the future will look
2035?
like.
2035? Like,
Yeah, that's
we got
good. It's right
12
around the
years
corner
to figure out which technology to switch to.
And there may be a new one that's as yet undiscovered. So what I'd like to see, and I've recommended in a lot of the regulatory engagements that I've had, academia is somewhat involved in a lot of these debates, but not fully involved. And I participated at a study with Stanford University about carbon capture and what are the things that readily available that we can do to address the carbon issue. But there's this unknown of what new technologies might be developed in the next 5 to 10 years. So what I'd like to do is we have the UC system, the CSU system, and the best private colleges in the world should be working together to what is that next iteration? And it might be hydrogen. It could be another fuel type that we just don't quite know yet. Everything's headed toward electricity right now, or electrification, and that's great. But if we woke up tomorrow and every car that's in California presently suddenly became electric, there's no possible way to charge those vehicles.
What's interesting, I remember last year they had a big day at the Capitol. They had like the Nikola electric truck. They had the Tesla electric truck. Your members are actually using these things now. Are you getting any feedback on how they're operating or how they're doing in the wild?
They're working, but they're working very short ranges. And if you have a tight cluster of a distribution network, and LA might be a good example of that. It's very dense with its population and its commercial presence, might work. But the long hauls, we're not quite there yet because the weight of the batteries, and that's the issue for even the electric car. It's the weight of the battery more than the range limitations. Very heavy vehicles that they look lighter because, like a Honda CR-V or so, that's a small car. We got a several thousand-pound battery in there.
Yeah.
And it has wear and tear on the tires, on the roads. So there's still a lot of things we need to get a better grapple on what they actually mean. And then I think we can move forward.
Right. So this is an interesting year because it's the second year of a 2-year session. So short window to introduce new legislation. You still have carryover from last year. Kind of what are your top focuses right now in 2024?
Ours is going to be, of course, that manufacturer's investment credit. Number one priority for us by far. There's some implementation carryover issues from last year. So Senate Bill 253 by Senator Weiner is the scopes 1, 2, and 3 reporting requirement on manufacturers. So we'll be involved in that regulatory process. His legislation required the regulations to be done in 1 year's time. And even the governor in his signing message said, there's not enough money to create these regulations and there's not enough time.
Right.
So I'm thinking that there will be some form of corrective legislation this year that will do two things: fund, like our appropriation and authorization issue, fund the regulation, and then allow a reasonable amount of time for the Air Resources Board to do its job. And its job is to develop regulations, but include stakeholders like us in the development of those regulations. And the way Senator Wiener's legislation was crafted, it doesn't do that.
Mm-hmm.
So we need to fix that, which is another priority of ours. And then the rest is just looking for ways to ensure a future workforce that's trained, skilled, and ready. And to the point of what people focus on and not, career technical education, CTE, vocational education. Those are things that we need to have a more open and honest conversation with ourselves so that we can focus on that, because it's good paying jobs. And sometimes a 4-year college track isn't the best thing for somebody. And we need to have another economic alternative for them. And in our view, it's manufacturing.
Right. It's interesting. California has been the home of tech, and we've had these kind of various tech booms. And, we have just kind of finishing this social media tech boom, and now we're going into this AI. And it's kind of like, what is AI? I know some of us are fooling around with Chat GPT, but, we're hearing a lot about it. We're hearing about, what is it? And kind of how is it applying to manufacturing? Is it, replacing people, replacing jobs? What is the future of AI in manufacturing, and what are you looking at right now?
And with manufacturing, interesting, over the hundreds of years that it's actually been in place, it's all been advanced and developed on efficiencies and technologies for improving output and generating, good economic activity. There's machine learning right now that goes on a lot of shop floors where if you can produce 100 widgets, one day and the next day you can do 101, hey, well, let's keep it going at 101. It's the machines that are working together to do that. But I think with artificial intelligence among society anyway, we just don't know what it is. And when you don't know about something, you tend to be fearful. So what would be helpful is to have some meaningful, I guess I'll call them scientific discussions.
Mm-hmm.
What is AI? And you're right, the Chat GPT, everybody tries that. And you can develop some pretty interesting writing and the like. But when students in university or school start using artificial intelligence to generate academic papers with, seemingly false pretense, and then things get based on those, we have this invirtuous cycle of creating fake information.
Right.
So guardrails need to be established, and we should look at that. Congress, I think, has between 7 and 10 bills right now pending on it. I can only imagine next year it's going to get crazy. But once we understand what it is, and importantly, what it isn't, I think we'll be able to move forward on it. But right now, we're in the manufacturing sector. We have our annual meeting coming up in March. We're going to have a panel on artificial intelligence and what it means to manufacturing, because it may be as simple as efficiency. And it's not about job replacement. I sat on the governor's Future of Work Commission a couple of years ago, and the big topic was, is automation going to replace jobs? And a report, it either came from Berkeley or UCLA, analyzed 250 jobs from I think it was 58 to present. So good 50 plus years of background. And they said there's only been one job that's been replaced by technology. And they, of course, asked us, which job do you think it was? And we were all wrong. It was an elevator operator. It was the only job.
Those were going until like 2003
exactly,
here.
Yeah. So that was an aha moment that, okay, when we talk about automation, let's not immediately jump to the conclusion that it means job replacement. It's job enhancement, the way I look at it.
But it's kind of interesting, because, it might replace a kind of a more menial task with a higher, required task. So you might get a more qualified, higher paying position, right? Yeah.
Well, a very good example, very real example. At Jelly Belly down in Fairfield, make the best candy in the world. They had employees there that as the jellies, the beans, they call them, came out of the mixer, they were on 25-pound wooden pallets, but they're small. And there was an employee lifting those up and stacking them. The last one was stacked at 6 feet high. So the shoulder impact was big. And they realized that somebody developed a picker to do all of the lifting, and that person now runs the joystick to move it, and no more shoulder issues. So is that, automation, efficiency, still have the employee there. And that's the one thing that we need to have a more honest discussion. It's not about replacing people.
Right.
You still need the people to work.
That's interesting. It's so cool. Like, I don't know, they'll post videos of different manufacturing, jelly beans, different foods and things like that, like little reels on Instagram. Do you guys have stuff like that where you can see like what other manufacturers are doing and how things are made?
We do. We actually have an Instagram channel, TikTok channel, and X, Twitter at CMTA, and we highlight our members in some of their processes, and it's fascinating because the jelly beans don't show up on the shelf in a jar.
Right. The
lettuce doesn't grow on the back of the grocery store and miraculously appear in the produce section. So just the seeing is believing with manufacturing. And once consumers see what actually happened, it's pretty cool.
Oh yeah, it's like wow, you could just watch it all day. Some of those things, yeah. I imagine a jelly bean. You're just like, wow, all the different colors.
Yeah,
and things
it's
like
in a
that.
big. It looks like a small cement mixer.
Yeah,
And they throw sugar in. It just it's amazing. Great tour down there.
kind of. So Silicon Valley, that's kind of where they used to make semiconductors, the chips, and they used to be like really big as this room, and now they're teeny tiny and they're super powerful. Kind of what's the status of like the chip builders? Like NVIDIA is something we hear about all the time, and do we still have a strong presence in making these semiconductor chips?
We're getting it back is the way to look at that. So Solidigm came back here to Sacramento. Bosch is investing several billion out in Placer County. And I think COVID was the kind of underscored the need to have greater control, if you will, over the semiconductors because they're in everything.
Right.
In fact, the automobile industry had a slowdown because there's so many chips in the cars that people didn't realize. So with that reshoring of chip manufacturing here in California, it's going to be a great thing for us because we're, again, geographically positioned for it. Because our biggest market is to the west. So the Asian markets are the biggest trading partners with us, other than Mexico, of course. And it makes perfect sense to have that kind of symbiotic relationship. And having those jobs come back to California is wonderful, particularly with the instability in Taiwan and that area of the world.
Right. You guys do a great job highlighting kind of the manufacturers in California. Kind of what do you guys have planned this year in terms of legislative days or kind of panel days for members to learn more about the manufacturing here in California?
Well, starting off in March is International Women's Month. So we have a Women Making California conference on March 5th. Oh, nice. It's going to be here in Sacramento. It's grown double in size the first 2 years that we did it. So we're expecting further growth. We started in our own office upstairs from here. We had about 50 women in attendance. Last year we had 100, and we're shooting for 150 this year. And it's to discuss issues, ways, barriers, and opportunities for women to be more involved in the manufacturing sector. And it's one of our most popular conferences. So we're really looking forward to that. We're having our annual meeting later in March, where we're going to discuss the broader agenda for the rest of the year. But it's going to revolve around the tax credit and some other things that I mentioned. And then in October, which is the National Manufacturing Month, we have Manufacturing Day, where we have our members open up their doors for the community to come in and take a look. And then we have a Making California conference within the month of October. And embedded in that was one of the most exciting things that we've done at CMTA probably in 25 years. Last year, we had a Coolest Thing Made in California competition. We had nominations. We had 120 products nominated. We had a voting system, kind of a bracket system. Ended up with 4 finalists. And there were over 100,000 votes cast for this competition. First time out, we generated media attention up and down the state. And the winner for 2023 was, surprisingly, interestingly, and maybe not so surprisingly, the Model Y Tesla.
Oh, yeah.
They won the competition.
What were the top 4?
So the Model Y Tesla, we had a Northrop Grumman satellite, we had the Hubble, the James telescope, and then locally the Carmazzi caramel corn. Made it in the finals because social media. They have such a broad reach in social media.
That's amazing.
That they made it through. It was awesome.
That's interesting. Like just I was just talking to a food restaurateur, and he described himself as a food manufacturer. And I'd never thought of that before. But that's what.
Yeah, it's made here just at Fair Oaks and Watt Avenues where they make it.
That's amazing. That's amazing. Kind of, last time we spoke, kind of long-term solutions for making California kind of like the Garden of Eden for manufacturing. Kind of, what more work do we need to make done to make this kind of the best manufacturing state in the nation?
Well, I think there's 2 things. The first thing we've been working on the last 5 years at CMT, and that's changing the narrative about manufacturing. It had been negative. It's not dirty, dark, and dangerous as a lot of people thought. It's actually very clean, safe, and one of the best places to actually go to work is in a manufacturing facility. So that part is ongoing. Our communications effort with Ananda Rachid and her team just doing a great job. Then the second part is translating that narrative into initiatives and actions in the legislature and regulatory bodies. A little bit harder to do because of this misconception we're trying to correct and then advance it forward. So I think 2024 and beyond, it's going to be going to the legislators and the regulators and probably taking them out to see the facilities. Because once they see it, then they understand it at least a little bit more. Maybe not completely, but a little bit more. And if the narrative change and a tour and a hands-on approach can pivot the way someone thinks, I think we'll have a much better time about promoting manufacturing here in California than we have today, because it's a challenge. I'll be honest, it's
That's
a
funny.
challenge.
Like I've never thought like manufacturing in a negative light, but I guess like people think about the 1920s and child labor and poor work standards, and
Yeah, and
I guess that's all we read about in
Yeah.
school, right? We never read about positive things.
it's like the best kept secret, I think, in the economy.
Right. Probably the truth is a lot of these facilities you could eat off the floor. They're so clean.
Yeah.
Yeah.
In fact, I've toured Tesla, and you could have a conversation like you and I are having right now at this volume level anywhere in that factory.
That's
We could do
amazing.
this. We could do the podcast on the
Yeah.
shop floor at Tesla, and it's just a testament to how things advance and move forward, clean, safe, efficient, and it warms my heart whenever I get to go to a manufacturing facility.
What are some of your favorites to visit and take members to?
I think just from a experiential, so we'll be here local. Blue Diamond Growers is just up the street.
Yeah.
On 16th Street here in Sacramento. Siemens Mobility down in the Florence Perkins area, turning out rail cars for all over the country. Just amazing. And you see the size of those things up close and personal, and how much work goes into them is just phenomenal. And then the aerospace sector is just, we're putting things back up into space. We're going to go back to the moon soon. It's just really amazing
Yeah.
what you can see and do here in California on a large scale or a small scale. We have a lot of small manufacturers here.
Yeah. Something that we don't see in front of our face all
Yeah,
the
you
time,
don't.
but it's super cool. They're made here. That's awesome. Well, Lance, thank you so much. Sounds like you got a busy year. Looking
gonna
forward
be.
to see what you got planned in March. Hopefully you get more than 150, and looking forward to see what you're doing on socials. So
Thanks,
thanks
Joe. We
for joining
appreciate
and giving us the update.
Appreciate the opportunity to always share with you. Thanks a lot.
Awesome. Thanks.